Today on the newscast, he's the best-selling author of the blockbuster books, The Harbinger and The Harbinger 2. Jonathan Cahn is here with prophetic insights into the future of America and Israel. That's next. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. I'll be in Israel over the next several days, bringing you on-the-ground breaking news content that you will not want to miss right here on the Watchman Newscast. So be sure to keep it here all week, starting tomorrow from Israel. In the meantime, we've got a very special guest joining us today to kick things off. For years, Rabbi Jonathan Cahn has been warning of the consequences that come when a nation turns away from God. First, in his blockbuster book, The Harbinger, and now in his latest bestseller, The Harbinger 2, Jonathan has issued prophetic warnings to the United States that really bring to mind the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, "To whom much is given, much is required." Now, America has been blessed more than any nation in the history of the world, but in the process, it has moved further and further away from God. Ancient Israel followed that same dangerous template and suffered greatly as a result. So, can America avoid that same fate? Will revival come to this land? And what about the future of Israel? Jonathan Cahn joined me recently at TBN's New York City studio to break it down. Take a look. Israel, America, both being shaken right now in many ways.
Yes.
Let's start in our own backyard, Jonathan. You have written many times The Harbinger, Part 1 and Part 2, and many of your writings, your speeches. You're focusing on the shaking and the division in the United States right now, more than at any time in our lifetimes, I think.
Absolutely.
What is going on here, and what does this all mean prophetically? I think a lot of people are asking that right now.
Yeah. When I wrote the first book, when I wrote The Harbinger, for those who don't know, it's the opening up of a template, a biblical template of national judgment. What happens when a nation that has known God turns away from God and he calls to it? There's a warning. They're shaking. In mercy, they're shaking. Well, there's a classic pattern in the Bible. It happens with Judah, happens with Israel, happens again in the time of Messiah. Before the great shakings come, or before the judgment comes, there is a warning, an initial shaking, and that comes in the form of an enemy invasion or enemy attack. Happened in Israel with the Assyrians, happened with Judah with the Babylonians years before. And God is saying, listen, I'm warning you. You have to come back. It's a wake-up call. You know, I mean, all of us have been praying for America to come back, but we need a wake-up call. So the first thing is that it happens years before. And so it happened with America. With The Harbinger, what that opens up is when 9/11 happened, it had every one of the signs of this biblical mystery. I mean, every one of them. These 9 harbingers that appeared in the last days of ancient Israel appear now, a lot of them right where we are right now. I mean, we're talking about this. New York City, South New York City, which is where we are. And some of them appeared in New York City, some appeared in Washington. It was the initial warning. The template doesn't stop there. I knew that that was not the end, that was the beginning. The template is that then the nation is given a span of time, years of time, but to come back. And the thing is, if it comes back, then there's revival. Then
God in His mercy gives us this opportunity.
Yeah, the initial shaking is that the full weight will not come. We have been in this period of time, but that period of time then leads to something, and it leads to greater shakings. And so we're watching now America shaken as, in our lifetime and even beyond our lifetime. I mean, the Civil War is pretty much, we've been shaken one thing after the other, and there's so much behind this.
Israel was shaken, obviously, biblically, many times. God, as you said, Jonathan, sent those warnings. How did Israel react to those warnings, those harbingers that God gave them?
Not good. And instead of coming back to God, they hardened themselves, and they defied God, and they actually got worse. They headed away completely from God, and that's really what the warning of the harbingers are. It's not just the warning of judgment, it's the warning of a nation hardening its heart. So that's what they did, and what happened was, years later, that window came to an end, and the Assyrians came a second time. And when they came this time, it wasn't a warning, it was destruction. That's where you get the 10 tribes, the 10 lost tribes. They were wiped off the face of the earth, pretty much. I mean, as far as a nation, that never came back. And with Judah, similar thing. The southern kingdom, warning, Babylon comes in. Years later, they, instead of turning to God, they turn away from God, get worse, and the judgment comes. They return. So that is the danger of where we are.
Yeah, we have this template, Jonathan, as you just laid out. Ancient Israel did not turn back to the Lord. 9/11 really opened the floodgates in many ways, I guess you could say, for judgment. It's been 20 years now.
Yes.
How about America? What has
Yeah.
happened to America since 9/11? Have we gotten the wake-up call? Can you compare now and then?
I think that's why I was supposed to write that book. I mean, because it's a warning.
Released in 2012, by the way.
2012.
Part 1, Harbinger,
Yes.
blockbuster worldwide bestseller.
Yeah, and I always knew there was going to be a sequel, but I could never write it until the Lord really said it. I didn't know that on the day after 9/11, Tom Daschle in the United States Capitol actually proclaims the verse of the Harbinger, that is the verse of pronouncing judgment on a nation and linking the attack with the beginning of judgment. He has no idea what he's doing, but this was America's response. Now, he repeats this Isaiah 9:10. That's the son of the Harbinger, where the people, they get the strike, instead of coming back, they say, no, we're going to come back stronger without God. Well, basically, he says that, and he doesn't know what he's saying. But he says at the end of his speech, he says that, and then he says, this is what we will do. It's prophetic. Again, the warning is not just that God is saying you're in trouble, but it's saying it's warning the nation about defiance. So what happened after 9/11 is instead of coming back, people flocked to churches. Yeah, there's going to be revival. 3 weeks. And then they turn back, because without repentance, there cannot be revival. We never turned our course. So what happened is we're actually following what Daschle said. What Daschle said, it was like prophecy from Capitol Hill. We didn't just not come back. We got worse. We've been racing away from God. I mean, accelerating. Not only are the harbingers the things that are in the harbinger, the tree, at ground zero, the stone and the thing, but America itself, the course that it's following is a harbinger, because we're following the same course of ancient Israel, but that doesn't end well. Isaiah said, woe to those who call evil good. Okay, that's first.
And good evil.
And good evil. That's right. The first thing is the nation starts accepting things that it never would have accepted before. Israel, did that with Baal, with all the gods, and with immorality. Did that. So the second part is the nation then starts calling good evil. So they start calling the people of God evil. They start trying to cancel them, silence them. Look at the last days of Judah, and what do you have? You got Jeremiah in prison. They try to cancel him. So now we're watching the other side of the coin, where it's saying now that God is wrong, that Christianity is wrong, the people of God are wrong. This is dangerous. We're radicals. We have to silence them. So we're watching that now. That's a deepening stage.
Yeah, I can't let you out of here without asking you one question about Israel. We focused obviously on the United States today. You've also written a book about Israel as well.
The Oracle.
Of course, the Oracle.
Yeah.
We did a show here on TBN. In terms of the prophetic timeline that we are on, and Israel facing some problems recently with Hamas, as you look at the prophetic landscape regarding God's land, what do you see? What are your impressions?
Yeah, well, one thing is what we have seen in all this time, and we're talking about from Trump to now, is we saw the center being Jerusalem. It's kind of like a spotlight. Back then, if we lived a while back, you did the big spotlight, hey, the Jews are going to return to the land. Then you have the spotlight narrows to, we got a state of Israel, a nation of Israel. Then it goes to Jerusalem. That's where we are, and the Temple Mount. And so it's kind of like the spotlight is going, so that's one thing, with Trump's recognition, all that. The focus is on that, the country is on that. And yet now we even see this recent thing that's been happening in Israel began linked to the Temple Mount.
Yes,
Folks,
it did.
why? We've been there. There's nothing much there. Because this is the spotlight. This is the place where it's all coming back. So if all God's purposes are kind of converging, then all the enemy's purposes are going to converge too. You're going to have conflict. You're going to have violence. That's not away from the Bible. That's what the Bible's speaking about. The Bible says in the last days, the focus of the world is going to be Jerusalem, and there's going to be conflict. People are going to try to move it. Well, all this is still linked to that. So the end game is Jerusalem. The end game is Messiah coming. And so the fact that we're living in a day that Israel exists is amazing, but the fact that the whole world's centered on Israel, that's amazing, at size of New Jersey. And the third thing that is focusing on Jerusalem and the Temple Mount where Messiah is coming, that's telling you something, because the enemy he doesn't waste his ammunition. He's going to attack where God's going to do a great thing. And by the way, take that as a personal thing. If the enemy's attacking you, you're dealing with resistance, you're dealing with that, it's a good sign, because it means that there's something very great coming. You're in God's will, you're going to attack, keep going, because you're going to see something great at the end of that. So say with Israel, and the thing that we're going to see in the world at the end of this is Messiah himself.
Yes, the city of the great King Jesus.
Yes.
Yeshua.
Yeah.
Jonathan, great stuff as always. We could do maybe 10 other shows, and we probably will. Yes, as always, my friend, the one and only Jonathan Cahn, thank you so much.
Thank you, Erick.
God bless you.
Always a blessing.
Big thanks once again to Jonathan Cahn for joining us. Folks, remember, subscribe to Jonathan's channel right here on YouTube for those incredible prophetic insights. 2 quick notes before we go. If you want to watch my entire interview with Jonathan Cahn, check us out this Thursday night, June 10th, on the Watchman TV show. If you love the newscast, you will love our TV show, a 30-minute weekly program on TBN, the Trinity Broadcasting Network. That's 10 p.m. Eastern Time here in the States. If you don't live in America, don't worry about it. You can catch clips here on the Watchman News channel or on TBN's website at tbn.org. And lastly, of course, reminder, I will be in Israel all this week and the early part of next week bringing you on-the-ground breaking news reports from God's land. You will not want to miss it. I am excited to get back to Israel, my second home, and to the city of Jerusalem and points beyond throughout the land of Israel. Keep it tuned right here on the Watchman Newscast. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.